Next, I'll defer to the chairs and look to our audience online.
Okay. So I will begin by opening the planning board meeting for November 6th. And roll call: Jen Boosteen.
Yep.
Alden Clark.
Here.
Rod Cobb.
Here.
Charlie Palmisano.
Here.
Jamie Pennington.
Here.
Heather Rogers.
Here.
Ryan Balcom.
Here.
And Rick Kinder here. So we have everybody here.
All right, this is Heather Shand. I'm chair of the Planning and Development Committee. We are here for a joint hearing with the planning board. Councilor Wright is here, so we have a quorum. Councilor Preston is not. Our item is a committee of the whole item, and I see that Councilor Polly is here, and is Councilor Donahue.
She is online.
And Councilor Donahue, one of the sponsors, is online.
Okay, Andy.
Okay, just briefly, for folks, I'm just throwing up here on the screen. This is a recap, really. This doesn't, in my view, unless folks want me to unpack further, doesn't, in my view, require a whole lot of explanation. I think at this point, mainly because we discussed this matter earlier in the year. We are required under state statute to allow a certain amount of multifamily housing as of right near transit. And the sum result is that we had discussions earlier this year as to where and how to do that. Primarily the discussion started with where geographically in the city we want to do it. We ruled out the Story Avenue, Low Street area. Downtown wasn't in the mix there. And so that left us with the 40R district. And that was a good place to start because there are certain parameters already built into the statute for our 40R district. And our existing 40R district provided a significant amount of the required family allowance. So we proposed to build on that, and this map here, which I've updated, it's been, again, this is just the formality of the agreement we essentially had in concept earlier this year. This map just represents now the 40R district as it is today, which is sub-district A, sub-district B, a smaller sub-district, allowing a slightly smaller scale height and size of buildings. To recognize State Street, and all we've decided to do is essentially incorporate the Hines Way parcel into that sub-district B, and then more substantively extend sub-district C, a new sub-district down Parker Street for some of those properties. So those are called out in the orange or yellowish boxes, and the rest of it is just illustrating the map. The text of the amendment itself has a couple of things in it, real brief. So one is I have suggested, since this was initially sponsored, that we all, and although we have not heard back from the state yet, we're expecting to hear momentarily. So, but one thing that I did want to make sure there wasn't any ambiguity about in the ordinance is paragraph 4 is referenced in the in there. And paragraph 4 in the existing smart growth district was added, during the adoption process shortly thereafter, to essentially limit development on the east side of the 40R district. So if you look at the Route 1 corridor and State Street, not allowing that permit process to take place before the planning board until the safe crossing was made of Route 1 and State Street. So given that those crossings are now in place, it's actually as of this year, that provision is no longer necessary. And for 2 reasons, I think it should be deleted. One is to not cause any ambiguity or confusion for any applicants or anybody reading the ordinance. It's no longer applicable or necessary, so we wouldn't really be enforcing it anyway. But 2, although that's something you could essentially have under the 40R statute and have a reduction to the amount of build out, essentially that can happen there from a numerical position. I think the state needs to see that that's immediately permittable, not something that's held up. So here we're just taking out the paragraph that's no longer relevant, and that restriction that will allow, if someone were to come in for permitting, and that there's a lot to come in. There's a clarification of the acreage being adjusted. That's not surprising because we're expanding our district, and there's a date change for reference in the map. And then the only other sort of substantive thing in there is the planning board had discussions since the city council and planning board had met on this, and we met with our zoning advisory group. We had some discussions here at the planning board about some dimensional requirements that are in the 40R district today, and a preference for in sub-district C having some slightly different parameters, primarily to deal with the way the building relates to the street and maintain the ability to have a bike path and sidewalk connection adequately with the appropriate landscape strip along Parker Street, given where its alignment is and so forth. So in essence, there are a couple of things shown in bold here that are just markup to adjust in District C, sub-district C. Some of those parameters in terms of the lot frontage, size or setbacks. There was a slight adjustment to the height of the building, still 4 stories, but 40 feet to sort of taper off a little bit rather than 35. And then there was a little bit of adjustment recommended by the planning board here of the council. It's coupled with is just a couple of changes to the design standards to allow a little more flexibility for applicants proposing their building to the board in terms of the exterior sort of treatment or detailing. And that's basically the essence of what you have before you. It's a couple of tweaks basically off of what we looked at last, I would say late spring.
Are there any questions from city councilors or planning board?
Just one very brief question. In paragraph 5, where we're talking about maximum building / structure height, within sub-district C, we're limiting it to 40 feet. 4 stories and 40 feet. And typically, the 4-story building like this, the ground floor, there's an opportunity for that to have a higher floor-to-floor height because there are common uses that could be larger spaces that require higher ceiling heights. There is the outside chance that there's some other use that would be required. So I'm wondering if the 40 feet could be revised to 45 feet, so it's consistent with sub-district A.
This is something we actually did talk about this during the SAG, something advisory. And one of the things that I think, and we certainly we could change it to 45, but this was actually intentional. And the idea was that from the point of view of the way that EOHLC computes density, they consider a 40-foot building to be a 4-story building. So that was the way that we got the number of units that we needed to get by calling it a 40-foot building and the 44 stories. And I think that there was some discussion back and forth whether we wanted to go as high as 45, but that's certainly open for discussion and whether we wanted to have 4-story, 45 buildings there. But that's again something we discuss.
It says 4 stories.
Yes, it says 4 stories, right? But what I'm saying is the way that EOHLC considers a 40-foot building a 4-story building. So the sense I think that we thought was they probably would end up being 3-story buildings, but we wrote into the zoning as 4-story.
If I may, I think it sounds like you might be, so I think you're referring, Rick, to what the statute or what the department is going to consider an adequate height.
The way they measure it.
Right, how they to make an adequate calculation for that floor. In your case, I think, Bob, you're referring to from a design perspective, whether or not it benefits us to allow potentially 45 or additional height to work at the first floor. Is that?
I'm just saying, ultimately, from a zoning point of view, you'd want to give the developer that kind of flexibility in terms of a 4-story building.
I had no reason myself as planning director to recommend a change from 45. I was fine with that, but it did come up with discussion. That was where 40 was where we landed.
Yeah, we were, to be frank about it, we were looking at 3-story buildings along there, using 40 feet to get the computation to work out as a 4-story. But again, there's no magic number. 5 feet there's no magic in 5 feet. So
If I remember correctly, when we were discussing it in council, I think some folks wanted to keep it at 40 just because we wanted to be a little bit subservient, it's probably not the right word, but not quite as tall as the ones that are at 1 and 3 Boston Way. Because we know those are the taller of the two, and we thought coming down Parker Street, we didn't want to have that same mass because everything else coming out is going to be much shorter.
right. Yeah. So. Jamie.
As a thought, as someone who's designed and built these, the likely consequence, not guaranteed, but likely consequence is someone to use a pitched roof because then you can use the median height or the mean height definition of roof.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's a good or a bad consequence, but I think that is probably a likely consequence. People will see 4-story, developers will see 4 stories, like, oh, I can achieve this with a 4-story and a roof.
Yeah.
So I mean, again, not saying that's bad or good, I just think that will probably be a likely consequence of that.
I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other.
I'd like to also note that Councilor
Any other questions before we open the public hearing? If not, let's open the public hearing. If anybody wants to speak to this proposed zoning ordinance about the MBTA, the changes to the smart growth district for compliance with the MBTA multifamily housing requirements, please come forward. Anyone online?
Not seeing any takers.
Okay. In that case, we'll close the public hearing. And I could look for do you want to go first?
Why don't you guys go first and then we'll wrap it up.
Do I have a motion regarding this, either as presented or as amended?
So I would move to submit the report as
Recommend it as presented?
recommended as presented.
Any
second it.
Second?
Sure.
Okay. Any discussion? If not, then I'll call for vote. All those in favor? Aye. Raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay, we will submit that report to the city council tonight as well.
Would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I move to send this forward to the full committee.
I will second that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Do we need to hang out for your P5 bit?
No, because we're done with,
Okay.
that's at the very end, and it's under general business.
Okay. All right. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor? Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Right. Okay. You're welcome. Okay, the second item on our agenda is a public hearing for the city of Newburyport, 59 Low Street, major site plan review continued from October 16th. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having us back. We have uploaded some new drawings, new site layout, new grading, and new conceptual plan for Low Street. At our last meeting, there were 4 outstanding comments. The first was to shift the crosswalk on Low Street to the north to align with the entry drive, as Sandy is pointing out there. The second comment was to angle the sidewalk as it enters the site, to sort of hug the property line. You know, sort of see where the desire lines will probably likely be for pedestrians, so we've done that. The third was to ask if the fire department would be okay with narrowing the exit drive to 16 feet. They have requested that we do not do that, but we have shown striping on either side of the driveway to visually show that a single aisle of exit for a vehicle rather than a double, to potentially remedy any sightline issues as 2 cars might be queuing at that intersection. And finally, the fourth item was to put some signage at parking spaces number 22 and 23, which are the parallel spaces in front of the modular gym, to make those shorter term parking areas. Andy, I don't know if you have the TEC plan.
I do, yep.
Mirrors this. So our city engineer, Diane Gagnon, who is en route, I don't know if she's online yet, but she was on her way here.
She is.
She has been working with our consultant TEC to get those 2 drawings coordinated, so you should see identical plans. Nothing's changed in terms of the photometric plan. Nothing's changed on the architectural plans or elevations, although stuff is here with us tonight if there's any other questions related to architecture. And nothing has changed on the landscape plan either. I understand that the landscape plan doesn't show the sidewalk realignment, but it did not impact plantings at all. And that's the gist of the changes you're seeing.
Any questions from the board? I will, I can, actually do have a question. So maybe it's a comment. In this plan, I'm a little bit concerned about I think I mentioned this to Andy earlier, the merge. um, Easy to ship. This merge is happening after the stop. So what I would be concerned about is, I'd like to have this merge move back past at this point, so that cars aren't merging, when cars are waiting in line, and the light changes, these cars don't merge into the same space. That's my basic concern there. I think that is kind of hazardous, these cars trying to get out ahead of the cars. So these could come back maybe 15 or 20 feet. That's one thing that was saw as an issue there. And you have mentioned that this what latest draft of the plan doesn't show it. There are notes about the return, the curb return meeting the existing.
Right, that has to do with where it meets the, Diane teaches better than I could, but she did comment on it.
That's something else.
Your-
I did have a question about the layout plan. Can you show the layout plan? And this is what I was trying to discuss earlier today. I understand the fire department's need for the wide exit there. The discussion we had at the last meeting, was coming in. If there's a car in that last space there. No, the other,
Oh,
that one, I did, yes. If there's a car, if there's a car there, and the fire equipment make it around that truck. And you said that,
Andy, if
They
you
have approved
pull the plan that way, you can see the turning radius that Diane put in that little.
Oh, yes,
okay.
little, detailed blow up.
Uh-huh.
So you can see the sweeping of the.
That's good. I see. Jen,
Yeah, I had a question. I'm sorry if I missed this earlier, but it's obviously really thoughtfully oriented in terms of students from the not. It feels pretty cut off from the charter school. Did the department and the designers think about how the charter school students would, obviously smaller number of them, but not central number of them would engage
Yes.
with the and charter school feedback on this?
I don't think the charter school has given specific feedback. on
No,
it.
but we have definitely had discussions with them. They want to do some improvement to their site,
Yeah.
and see whether that comes forward, but we have definitely discussed extending both on the city side, sidewalk improvements we
Yeah.
can do, but also them extending, some sidewalk over there. They
Yeah.
permit, that we were trying to bridge a sidewalk all the way, on the south side as well, to your point, but it remains to be seen exactly how much that would be city versus them at what times.
Right now, students from the charter school walk down the charter school to the other side and go down the sidewalk to the knock and then cross again. I know it's not
I have a student at the charter school and he probably won't do that.
ideal, but in an effort to try to not hold them this project to an additional multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars of sidewalk work, right now we're limiting the scope to the frontage of the facility.
Right, I don't know if that's Wayne who's raising his hand, is that,
Sure, if Wayne is there.
Yep.
Wayne?
It is Wayne. I just want to support Kim at that both locations that they have to cross at Johnson Street is a rapid flasher beacon. And then if we get this project here, we get the hybrid beacon. So at least the charter school has two signalized traffic control crossings to get to the youth center, which is not what you expect to, almost like an escort safe route to a destination is what we have here, which is better than it's the best thing we could come up with other than a sidewalk on the south side at this time.
Thank you.
any questions? Not, open up the public hearing. Anybody wish to speak to this application? Okay, then I'll close the public hearing. And um, ask for a motion. Before we discuss, ask for motions. And the motion would be to approve the site plan.
All right, I'll make a motion to approve the site plan.
Second,
Okay,
Question,
yeah,
Chair.
yeah,
I was absent last time, so I think if some of the associate members are prepared to abstain.
Okay.
Sure.
yeah, because
If I'm,
Brian, you've been participating, right? So you can vote. Okay, fine. So we have 7 members and we need 5 members. Okay. No, we need, this is not 2/3.
It's not your third, no, it's-
Okay. So question, Andy, do we need to have, should have checked this before we came in. Do we need to have stamp plans?
no, we do not hear the, we actually waive our. Yeah.
So as part of this, I would, if the mover and seconder would accept, I would like to have the motion reference the specific plans because they're coming from different dates. So I think we have existing conditions plan from, not sure, 9/24, is that what it is? They're all, let's see.
What's the title of the plan?
59.
It's
So 830 is the existing conditions plan, I believe. And actually, the existing conditions plan is not dated, but it's an existing conditions plan.
Just say
Yeah,
existing.
it's an condition plan. The site layout plan is of that's the date of it. Is it 10/21?
Most recent, but
10/21, yes, 10/21.
10/21.
Yep. The grading plan is a 10/21 also. Photometric plan is 8/29. The tech concept plan, I would say it's our most recent, the one submitted for the meeting tonight. It doesn't have a date. So it's that one. And the landscape plan, kind of lost track of. Let's see. Just so we're referring to the correct plan. The landscape plan, I believe, is also 8/29. It's actually not dated. So we'll soon. And then I would like to propose that change that I suggested up there, the condition of it to move that merge back 15 to 20.
So extend the emerge back.
Yeah, yeah.
15 to 20 feet.
Any further discussion of any sort?
Just how would you specify that move? Is it a footage or is it, how would you make that?
I would say 15 to 20 feet, just move it back, move the whole merge
Yeah.
back 15 to 20.
So you'll put it as 15 to 20?
Is there like a north side, east side? What
It would
is
be going east.
it going east?
if I'm asking, not that I have any particular preference one way or the other, it doesn't necessarily seem like it's an issue for the city per se as an applicant, but bringing that line back, do you want to just specify, because I think your primary point was bringing it back behind that line, do you want to just reference that the starting point for that angle starts at the line, or did you want to use 15 feet?
Just, so that I leave it up to the judgment, I think, of the city at this point, just so that the merge is done before it gets to the stuff.
Boy, it's too. Awesome.
Thank you.
Anything else? So, Alden, could I have you, because this is one of those situations where Harris wants us to read things into the record.
Yes, yeah, if you wouldn't mind, just briefly,
Yeah, just kind of skimming through the site plan review criteria, which are on page 4, 5, and 6 of the staff report. And just summarize.
So, the site plan review criteria covers the community character, development needs and purpose, meets the purposes of the site plan review by revitalizing a community recreational asset, is appropriate in regards to the size in relation to the land area upon which the building is situated, and is compatible with surrounding industrial, educational, residential, and recreational uses. The proposed development is also consistent with the city zoning and master plan goals. The traffic, parking, and public access. The development will improve public access, parking, and pedestrian and traffic circulation within the site. Specifically, the proposed layout of the Newburyport Youth Services Facility at 59 Low Street is designed to provide a logical traffic flow with one-way parking aisle with 2 curb cuts along Low Street. The project maximizes the convenience and safety of vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian movements. The design proposes on-site sidewalks and crosswalks to current and future sidewalk connections along the Low Street corridor. For health, public services, and utilities, the development minimizes adverse air quality impacts, noise, glare, and odors. The existing structure is served by the City of Newport's water distribution and waste removal systems. There is an existing sewer main, which is part of Low Street Betterment District, and a water line on Low Street. Overhead electric wires and a gas line also serve the building and are located on the northeast corner of the structure. Land use planning. The proposed development is consistent with the land use planning and development goals of the 2017 master plan. Goals of providing high quality municipal facilities and services based upon a 2021 site selection report that studied over a dozen locations across the city. The property at 59 Low Street was identified as a desirable property to develop a recreation facility to house the Newburyport Recreation and Youth Services Department. Open spaces and environmental protection. The proposed development minimizes adverse impacts to open space usage and retention, and it is integrated into the natural landscape. The proposed development minimizes adverse environmental impacts to such features as wetlands, floodplains, and aquifer recharge areas, and minimizes tree, vegetation, and soil removal and grade changes. As far as development and performance standards, the project meets the performance standards as listed in section 15H of the Newburyport zoning ordinance in the following ways. The pedestrian and vehicular access and traffic impacts. So these are the ones that we read. I'll continue. Yes. So the project minimizes pedestrian vehicle traffic and safety impacts on city roads. The site plan shows adequate vehicular access and safe site distance when exiting to Low Street. A parking lot containing 23 parking spaces, including 2 ADA parking spaces, is proposed at the front of the property. The parking lot will be accessed through a one-way vehicular circulation pattern to allow parents to drop off children at the front door. The number of parking spaces proposed meets the zoning requirement of 1 parking space per 500 square feet of floor space. The proposed site plan assures safe interior circulation by separating pedestrian areas and vehicular traffic within the site. For site plan and architectural design, the architectural design of the development contains 3 distinct design elements that reflect the function of each area. The design strives to respect the industrial heritage of the existing masonry building and reuses many of the existing window openings and transforms the garage spaces of the former building using large storefront windows to fill the new interior spaces with natural light. The new centrally located addition to the building acts as a bridge between the existing building and the proposed modular gym. The height, general massing, and rhythms of the facade are appropriate and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. For lighting, the exterior lighting design for the development project includes lighting along the side and rear of the building to provide egress lighting, lighting adjacent to the new entry to highlight the entrance and signage, and lighting mounted on the gym and on poles in the parking lot to provide a general lighting level for security purposes. Lighting poles and structures are appropriately scaled and styled for the project. Parking and pedestrian light fixtures are compatible with the building lighting and provide for a contiguous appearance of the project. For landscaping, all existing trees on the property will remain as part of the proposed project. 5 new trees are proposed along Low Street to separate the parking areas from the roadway. An additional 3 trees are proposed at the front of the building within the parking lot to satisfy the requirement to plant 1 shade tree per 10 parking spaces within a parking lot consisting of greater than 20 parking spaces. Also, additional trees are proposed at the rear of the building to help define the wetlands area and provide shade to the rear patio, half court, and lawn space. 3 arborvitae are proposed to screen the dumpster. Per the applicant's materials, as a mitigation measure, the stormwater basin and rain garden will be planted with a mix of native shrubs and herbaceous plants to both prevent people from entering the basin and to increase its ecological functionality and water treatment ability. For stormwater runoff, water quality, wetlands, and erosion control, the site plan includes an adequate provision for measures to prevent pollution of surface or groundwater, minimizing erosion and sedimentation, and measures to prevent changes in groundwater levels, increased runoff, and potential for flooding. The city engineering department created the stormwater design for 59 Low Street project. Planning board peer reviewer Phil Christensen reviewed the stormwater report and finds that the stormwater analysis is consistent with the submitted plans and the conclusion provided are correct. The Conservation Commission has issued an order of conditions. Environmental performance standards. The project addresses the development and performance standards referenced within section 11 of the Newburyport zoning ordinance. The project will not be conducted in a manner as to create any dangerous, noxious, injurious, or otherwise objectionable fire, explosion, radioactive, or other hazard, noise or vibration, smoke, dust, or other form of air pollution. Electrical or other disturbance, glare, liquid or solid, refuse or waste conditions conducive to breeding of insects, rodents, or other substance conditions or elements in a manner or in an amount as to affect adversely the surrounding areas. And for utilities, the existing utility structure is served by the city of Newburyport's water distribution and waste removal systems. Overhead electric wires and a gas line also serve the building and are located on the northeast corner of the structure.
Great. Thank you. Thanks. George, so we've read the criteria and standards into the record. We have a motion, second, referencing the various plan dates and incorporating that one amendment.
Thank you. Sorry, can I just verify the motion in second was?
Well, I think we're gonna revise the motion.
I think you can, wait, okay, so if you can accept the.
Just accept.
Accept, well, motion to accept the amendment. Motion.
And second.
In that case, any further discussion? If not, then all in favor? Any opposed? Great, that passes. Good. Okay. The next item on the agenda is general business. This is not a public hearing. This is, we voted at our previous meeting. 2 meetings ago?
I think it was 2 meetings.
2 meetings ago. To reconsider our prior vote based on some advice that we received from our council during the executive session. And so we are back. Our prior vote was a motion to approve, which failed. So we are reconsidering, and so I guess the thing to do would be to ask for another motion. And you have a draft draft special permit, general special permit findings as part of the staff report and a draft special condition. And so just to kick things off, I would accept a motion for this application in a second.
So, that's written.
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion to approve the special permit for 3 Center Street with the findings and special conditions noted in the staff report as reviewed and revised tonight.
Yes, it's good. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion? Jamie?
I'd be happy to wait in here, open the discussion. So just procedurally, I think when this was in front of us at the first night, of the open hearing, my recollection is that, we had a pretty rigorous debate about the power of attorney issue. A motion was made and the motion failed. That's my recollection, just high level speaking. We never really got to the special permit criteria in that conversation. As one member, I still feel strongly, having read a lot of the materials and thought about it multiple times, that the application could fail on the power of attorney issue, but I'm willing to put that aside. We do have guidance from the city's attorney, particular direction, and the board seem to be going in that direction. That's not an issue for me. I think it's still important that we discuss the special permit criteria. For me personally, I think it could fail on that basis. But we don't have to have that discussion. I may be in the minority in that as well, but I just want to throw that out there. Before we go to a second failed, potentially second failed motion, that would be really bad.
And I think, rather than do what we did in this previous application, which is get all the way to the motion and then have ultimately the findings, maybe at this point it's a good, as you're suggesting, to go through the findings one by one while the motion is on the floor, and then get to have that discussion and find out where the points of discussion are. So, Alden, would you read the first draft general special permit?
Okay, so under the, under the draft general special permit findings, the first one, the use requested is listed in the table of use regulations or elsewhere as in the ordinances requiring a special permit in the district for which application is made or is similar in character to permitted uses in a particular district, but is not specifically mentioned. In the zone B2 zoning district, the proposed investor STRU use is listed as a use allowable by special permit. Because the property is in the downtown overlay district, the planning board is the special permit granting authority.
So any discussion about this finding? No, we can move on.
Number two, the requested use is essential and or desirable to the public convenience or welfare. The zoning ordinance provides for investor STRUs. Newburyport has a need for various types of housing, including short-term housing.
Any discussion?
So this is one I would challenge because I do think the ordinance as written was intended to allow us to provide special permits when units met the conditions of the ordinance. In this case, there are several anomalies about this application that don't necessarily make it essential or desirable. Recall, the ordinance is trying to balance long-term rentals with short-term rentals. So the fact that this is a two-story structure in B2 and that's not really allowed, the fact that there's an odd parking configuration that relies on two off-site parking spaces, basically, that someone has to walk to in a very dense area, and bringing neighbors, bringing people from out of town to figure out how to use that. I don't feel that criteria has been met.
I don't believe that the two parking spaces are offsite. I think one is offsite and second one is located a couple of buildings away.
Fair enough.
Jamie, I share the concept.
So my question is, are we really arguing about the intent of the ordinance with your statements? Because I'm thinking that there is a need for housing various types with people coming in from out of town, short on space, having to go to Amesbury or Portsmouth or wherever to find places to stay. So I feel as though that's one of the concerns, and that's why we instituted this ordinance.
I respect that. I'm not trying to say anyone else would come to the same conclusion as me, but I think the fact that the first condition we read is that this is a special permit in our purview means that there's areas of judgment, and this is one of the areas of judgment, and that's fine.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Charlie on that. The town struggles, especially in the peak season, where any kind of visitors, family members, and the like. So I kind of second what Charlie was thinking.
And also in reference to the two-story provision and so forth, given the mixed nature of this neighborhood, it's already a mix of residential and stuff. It's not a street with first floor businesses, which is what I think the intent is on that, the business district restriction and stuff. So to me, that's less of a concern.
By the way, if I'm the only person that feels this way and you're making these counter arguments, you're strengthening the decision. So I have got no issue with that. If people don't agree with me.
Anything else on that? Okay. Number 3.
The requested use will not create undue traffic congestion or unduly impair pedestrian safety. The baseline use of the property is single family. Granting the special permit to authorize the quasi-commercial STRU use will have no impact on traffic congestion or pedestrian safety in contrast to surrounding business district and uses.
Anybody have any concerns or questions? I guess my only concern with this and with several others during this is just the use of the word quasi-commercial. I wonder what if that kind of weakens the statement if we just say granting the special permit to authorize the STRU use will have no impact. I'm not really sure that I agree that it's quasi-commercial, and if we're saying it's not going to have any impact with respect to a single family use, that quasi-commercial, I think, kind of raises a question.
So that would just be a deletion.
I would delete the word quasi-commercial.
And on that point, I don't see any difference between this just being used as a single family residence as opposed to an STRU as far as what traffic that generates.
Okay, number 4.
The requested use will not overload any public water, drainage, sewer system, or other municipal system to such an extent that the requested use or any developed use in the immediate area or in any other area of the city will be unduly subjected to hazards affecting health, safety, or the general welfare. The baseline use of the property is single family. Granting the special permit to authorize the quasi-commercial STRU use will have no impact on any municipal systems in contrast to surrounding business district and uses.
Again, I have a concern about the word quasi-commercial.
Yeah, and it's just because they see 3 instances, it would be worthwhile just making sure that's a typical motion for changing that.
It seems reasonable.
Okay, anything else about this particular standard? Okay, we're finding. Number 5, go ahead.
Yep. Any special regulations for the use set forward in the special permit table are fulfilled. The zoning board of appeals has granted 2 variances from the regulations for the short-term rental unit. The deadline for filing an application and the prohibition against first floor use for the STRU in the downtown business district. Other special regulations for the use would be fulfilled.
Any discussion about this? Nope. Okay. Number 6.
The requested use will not impair the integrity or character of the district or adjoining districts, nor be detrimental to the health or welfare. The baseline use of the property is single family. Granting the special permit to authorize the STR use will not be detrimental to the health or welfare in contrast to the surrounding business district and uses.
And number 7.
The requested use will not, by its addition to a neighborhood, cause an excess of that particular use that could be detrimental to the character of said neighborhood. No changes to the property are proposed. There are no other approved STRUs in the surrounding neighborhood. As there is no change in actual use, granting a special permit to authorize the STRUs will not change the character of the neighborhood. Furthermore, the zoning ordinance requires that the investor STRU be terminated by June 30th, 2027, so any detrimental impact would be temporary.
Anything? Good. Okay, number 8.
The proposed use is in harmony with the purpose and intent of this ordinance. The zoning board of appeals granted a variance from the prohibition on first floor STR use in the downtown business district, and the city's legal counsel opined that the term operator in the zoning ordinance encompasses a person who has been granted a power of attorney by the property owner. Based on these actions, the board determined that the proposed STRU use is consistent with the purposes and intent of the NZO.
Okay. Number 9.
The proposed use shall not be conducted in a manner as to emit any dangerous, noxious, injurious, or otherwise objectionable fire, explosion, radioactive, or other hazard, noise, vibration, smoke, dust, odor, or other form of environmental pollution. The proposed use is a residential use of a residential building and will not result in any hazards, impacts, or pollution beyond what is typical for a residential use.
So since that's the last one, I just want to say I didn't want to like talk in every single one in the interest of time. But I think my initial comments really are still applicable to items 2, 3, 6, 7, and 8, like about character, desirability, impact. So I just want to make that problem.
So say that again, because in number 2, you really mentioned you talked about parking, you talked about the second story there.
Kind of covered it all, too, but I think that could almost paste that into the answers to 3, 6, 7, 8. In particular, where the applicant said, I mean, we've embellished a lot, but the applicant said really simply, no, it will not. Yes, it is. No, it will not. Correct. No, it will not. So I stand by my response.
Okay, so taking all this into account, we'll move on to, and we haven't made a decision or anything yet, just taking all that into account. Moving on to the draft special conditions. And I'll go through those. I mean, there are basically 2 conditions. Actually, I had recommended a third, which you have not included, and I'm interested in hearing about that. So the 2 that are in here are the special permit is granted subject to a license to be granted to Tiffany Bartholomew as the party responsible for the SGRU. 2, consistent with relevant provisions of the Newburyport zoning ordinance, a special permit issued hereunder shall expire automatically on June 30th, 2027. The first one that I had proposed at some point was that the special permit is granted to Tiffany Bartholomew as the operator, because I thought that was part of the zoning, not just.
Sorry, you mean adding additional phrase to the number 1 special condition? Is that
That was, I actually had 3
right?
special conditions, and you deleted the first one.
Yeah, I think in Jennifer and I are discussing this, we're understanding that to be, you were trying to make sure that was clear once the license commission was looking at it, I think.
Well, this is the zoning, the second one is the license commission. I mean, the one that says a special permit is granted subject to a license, that's the license commission. But there's the zoning one too, which I understood was that under the zoning, only one operator could operate a.
Yeah, we could add the phrase in there. Yeah.
It was number 1.
Bullet.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that was what it was. It was,
All right.
is the special permit is granted to Tiffany Bartholomew as operator, just to make sure that we've covered that.
Yeah, it's a separate thing. Okay.
Is there anything further that anybody would like to discuss about this at this point? I mean, there has not been an amendment except for that last one, I think, or the 3 quasi commercials and that one special condition. So we're actually with those essentially 4 distinct changes, 3 wording deletions and 1 additional special condition. Is there anybody who wishes to make any further discussion? Okay, so then the motion, the vote with the call for a vote on the motion with those 4 changes. All those in favor of granting the special permit, please raise your hand.
I'm sorry, can you just clarify, we have motion and second to
Yes.
go with the,
Yep. The motion.
thank you.
Okay, all in favor? All opposed? So we have 5-2. So the motion carries. And 2 are Jen and Jane.
Yeah, understood.
Okay, great. So, moving on. The next item on the agenda is general business approval of minutes. We have three listed, but we don't have two of them listed, so we only have the October 2nd. I submitted some notes and comments to Caitlin. Did anybody else have anything that they wanted to submit or discuss? Okay, could I have a motion to approve the minutes of October 2nd, 2024?
We'll move to approve the minutes of October 2nd,
With
2024.
as amended.
As amended.
Okay. Doing a second, Bob?
Yeah.
Okay. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, moving on to discussion. Do you want to do, we have Counselor Gallagher, do you want to do the Port Plaza overlay district first?
That would make sense.
Thank you for waiting. So we have a revised proposed ordinance for us. We've closed our public hearing. And so this is simply a discussion and motion to make a report and recommendation to the city council that's required by state law.
And I would just add, if I could.
Yeah.
Through the chair, and I think, one of the sponsoring councilors here tonight, I'm sure is aware. I think, tomorrow night, the city council's planning and development committee is meeting on the same subject matter. So I think our goal, or something at least coming into this meeting, was that if the board is, issuing a written report, we would be able to push that tonight. Get it over to the city council so they would have it in hand for the meeting tomorrow.
So, in this case, based on, in part on our discussions in previous meetings, I drafted a proposed draft planning board report and recommendations, which Andy shared. And this is not, meant to be definitive, but it's basically a starting point for discussion, I think. And please, if there are any additional points that anybody would like to raise, or additional pieces you'd like to add into this or take away from this, let's just do it as we go through this. So, and first of all, Andy, I think I had highlighted the date of September 18th. We did discuss the meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we had an overview. That's, yeah.
So there's one of the things we talked about was, do we really want this to be only residential, or do we like mixed use development? I think there was some discussion of this back and forth. And so this is a significant piece that we should talk about. The difference is that if we allow non-residential uses, the quantum of vote by the city council rises from majority vote to 2/3 vote.
Wait, could you repeat that?
So if you allow multifamily uses, right, that's all you're doing. Under the new state law that was adopted as part of the economic development bond, then all the city council, normally zoning requires a 2/3 vote. But that law that was adopted in the Baker was in office, designated certain types of uses as only required, certain types of zoning changes, it's only requiring majority, 2/3 vote. And one of those changes was to allow multifamily residential uses as a variance. So if this is not it is not a policy change. This is not being driven by policy change. It's being driven by whether we think the city council would, or whether it's basically driven by the vote that's needed. So we discussed at least one of our meetings, maybe two of our meetings, that we thought that mixed use was appropriate for this area, with commercial on the ground floor and residential above. And so the question here is, do we want to recommend? So this is only a recommendation. The city council doesn't have to follow the recommendation. But as a planning board, do we want to recommend that the Kmart site include a mixed use development, or only be limited to multifamily residential? And the key point is that if we include mixed use, then the city council needs to approve it with 8 votes rather than 6.
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Again, just to the extent that's helpful at all to your discussion with the council going forward, I think it was mentioned at one point, in the prior discussion. There is also the ability procedurally to essentially have the simple majority vote on the multifamily allowance and then essentially take a second vote at the council meeting, on the subject matter if you wanted to, effectively to do the 2/3 on the distinct issue of allowing the commercial use there, right? Just to separate that entirely. So there is the mechanical ability, if you will, to sort of parse that one question off, if that is either the planning board or something they want to consider one or the other. So just FYI, there is a way to mechanically parse that question off without necessarily jeopardizing, so to speak, the debate. That's a majority threshold is reached or doesn't need to be 2/3.
So I understand our discussions should be driven by the vote, or should we be talking about what we think for planning we want to do?
Best practices planning.
Best practices first, and then incidentally, the vote, we can take that into consideration, right?
But it's nice to know we're not handcuffing the process by adding.
Yeah, that's the thing I think I just wanted to point out was it's not that, it's not that you necessarily have to think that by recommending that, it immediately puts them in the bucket where it has to be a 2/3 vote. There is a way of addressing that separately. But I think, to your question, Charlie, and Rick, you're a professional learner by background too. I would definitely say the primary recommendations from this board should be based on best practices. And then everything else is sort of, that we deal with from that, the details and mechanics of how it gets done. But I think, it's always down to best practice.
So, sorry, I did some research over the weekend, believe it or not. I went to the Southgate Plaza on Route 1 and was looking at their new construction. Say 4 stories. And then to Bob's point, the bottom of the first floor, it was maybe a little bit taller. Southgate Plaza. Anyhow, the point being, full development included both residential, mixed use with the retail down below, and then obviously peppered along the plaza were some, retail establishments, restaurants, Chipotle's, Athleta, and all that. And they looked like they did a fantastic job and drew a lot of good tenants into the plaza. So if you're thinking long term, you want these tenants there to remain and not have empty storefronts. So I guess part of the discussion, I think, should be, yes, let's at least consider maybe a mixed use. We all think that's what should be there. Then maybe back into the book.
You could, for instance, let me to the board here, you could, for instance, just add after in the box there, after that first sentence, just clarifying that, if there's any debate or concern about that being a separate, threshold reach, you could just parse, just,
Right.
As a reminder that,
They can remove it.
I think that we need to keep looking at the broader district. And if the goal of the district is mixed use, that can happen in a lot of different ways. I mean, I could imagine somewhere in this Story Avenue district, there might be a small street of townhouse units. And so there wouldn't be commercial at grade. It would be a purely residential street. And, there would be a kind of change in character to the district. And it would be kind of an urban formula that allowed residences to then feed into a commercial environment. But this type of building, a big block like this with residential, I think sort of, to me, suggests that we ought to reserve the opportunity for commercial at the ground floor. And it's also adjacent to commercial, which is next to Shaw's, which I don't think is going anywhere. And I think the idea of residential immediately adjacent to that is not a great juxtaposition of uses. So I think a lot of things can happen in the broader Story Avenue environment. So I wouldn't say that in every case, in every block, you have to have commercial, because maybe it's desirable to mix it up a little bit. But this building, I think, really kind of suggests commercial. On the north side, adjacent to Shaw's.
To build off, I think to consider Two hundred and twenty units, is that, yeah,
The most recent number we talked about, 200.
the 212 multiplied it by 1.5 people, what's the estimated amount of people that are building?
I don't know if I can speak to that.
Well, okay, let's just, let's say 1 point. Yeah. Jamie's good. Maybe like 300 people, so that means ultimately they'll need some commercial services, and if we're just plopping down simply residential in the one big commercial area that we have, and we may not have other residential, we may not have other commercial opportunities throughout the city, I think we should at least consider reserving some of that square footage to mixed use. That's just.
That makes sense.
I agree.
So are there any suggested changes to this item number?
We have mixed use in there, right?
Yep. Okay, number 2. So the existing proposed ordinance says maximum building and structure height shall be 4 stories and 45 feet. And maximum building / structure footprint shall be 68,000 square feet. The PAA shall require that buildings and structures within the PPOD shall have varying heights. And this is because of the size of this site and because of the significant change in elevation between Low Street and the parking area. And because the building concept building, which is not necessarily the building that's going to be built, but the concept building has a variety of roof heights through it. I felt that would be kind of complicated for the planning board to administer. So I am suggesting a absolute building elevations above sea level with that are specific to different sides of the building and are based somewhat on the graphic, the section that are in the concept, which is shown on page 2 of this draft planning board report. And the idea here is to recognize that what they're trying to do is to minimize the feeling of height for pedestrians coming down the street, even for vehicles, but more impactful for pedestrians. And just basically computing the numbers from this plan. So what it says is the maximum building elevation at the highest point of any roof shall be elevation 120, except within 15 feet and within 25 feet of Low Street, to give that step back. And then further to say there shall be no maximum building structure footprint, because I think as Bob pointed out at the last meeting, the footprint includes that underground parking. So it's no matter how you modulate the upper stories, the building structure footprint is essentially the entire lot. So why try to? I mean, we know what's being proposed. I try to regulate that. So that's an explanation for why I proposed that, and open to any other discussion or.
We can also say that by not limiting the footprint, and I think limiting it suggests it's a kind of suburban open space formula. There's only a certain amount of lot coverage that we're looking for. Yeah. In a district like this, that's sort of not the goal. We're looking for an urban environment, looking for setbacks perhaps from the building line that create public areas, perhaps outdoor cafes, etc. But this isn't a lot coverage discussion. This is an urban environment. So I think as you have worded it, with no limitation on that.
And you covered us with the sidewalks, landscaping,
Yeah.
right? So you don't have to state setbacks. Right?
I think this codifies what our discussion, I think it comes.
Okay. Number 3, again, removing the required open space of 100 square feet per dwelling unit, again, that urban standard. Replace it with the development shall include one or more public or semi-public common spaces adjoining a sidewalk to create activated pedestrian areas for dining or similar social activities. Again, trying to reinforce that idea of urban development. In paragraph 4G, restore the words and mixed-use projects, and that just goes with number 1. And number 5, building shall have the following relationships to sidewalks. Happy to hear from Jamie or Bob about these. Building shall be set back at least 15 feet from the back of the sidewalk on the street. And in the north and west sides, the building shall be set back no more than 10 feet from the back of the sidewalk for at least 60% of the length of the building. So the idea is to provide separation from traffic for residential units facing Low Street and to reinforce the street or right-of-way lines along the site driveway.
I just had one quick question about the 60%. In the smart growth district, doesn't it say 16% of the facade must be at building line, and then you're allowed setback?
I think it only says it for, or does it say it for the?
I think it does.
But we don't have a building line here. I think, isn't that the
Did you
difference?
say building line?
Well, I think that we have in the smart growth district, isn't there a maximum setback line?
There is.
And that's what the 60% is based on.
Yeah,
And we don't have a maximum setback line.
So are we saying that,
meaning there's not one being established.
There's no one being established here.
are we saying 60% of the building must be at the sidewalk or can be set back
Setback,
40%?
for at least 60%. 40% could be an inset. So 60% of the wall have to be at least 10 feet or less. 10 feet or less from the back of the sidewalk.
You're creating.
100% could too.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking about, entryways and that kind of stuff. Or places for public, dining.
The only other thing I would just put on the table is I continue to be concerned about Low Street and the setback along Low Street. And I think probably what is okay. But we've heard lots of discussion about traffic and safety on Low Street. The plan that's in front of us shows units at grade along Low Street with front doors that open onto, that setback area. The renderings show lots of pedestrian activity out there, and I just want to make sure we're all comfortable with the dimensions that are being proposed, because this is an active facade that we're talking about at grade on Low Street. At least as it's proposed right now.
So what would you think? Is a recommendation?
Well, I had a question about where the property line is to begin with. I mean, do we know?
Well, I think we have conflicting information in the drawings. I think the section shows it as being closer to the building than the plan does. I think.
Yeah, the plan I think is more accurate.
But the,
sorry.
but you're saying about well, I was thinking 15 feet from the back of sidewalk. If we have an 8-foot sidewalk, so that means it's going to be 23 feet from the edge of pavement. I guess the question is, you're concerned about being that close to the edge of pavement.
Yeah. Again, it kind of has to do with where the property.
This obviously doesn't show
I
exactly.
mean, if they were to build a sidewalk inside their property line is set back significantly from the curb.
Do you have the whole set? Andy?
Then it
Because I
might
think
be-
there's a I think there's another architectural picture below it.
Yeah, but I don't think it provides any more detail. Oh, you mean for the building itself? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so if you blow it.
Yeah, yeah, sorry, this doesn't show obviously.
No, I'm just looking at it.
Yeah, it doesn't show exact meets and bounds, but it does give at least an approximation of how far back.
So what this proposed recommendation does, it wouldn't allow this sidewalk configuration because it says a 5-foot sidewalk and then a 3-foot tree and landscaping band between the side of the street. And they have no buffer at all. So it's basically moving that back somewhat anyway. But the idea, I don't know, it's hard to say because we don't know how wide that side is. That plan. But I guess the basic idea is 15 feet. If you have a 3-foot buffer between the sidewalk and the street, and you have a 5-foot sidewalk, is 15 feet enough, or do you think it should be more?
15 feet plus 8.
23 feet from the street?
Well, I think that the open question would be then, could they do the building and shave off the portion of the building or? You don't know.
Yeah, it's become a little small.
Well, then also,
Margin.
ratio, if you're doing only 60% of it, then some percentage of it can,
Be intended.
these are.
But that 60% doesn't apply to those. Yes.
Right.
So, I mean, I have not, I don't have a firm position on this. If you think it should be a larger setback.
I get what you're saying. So what do you think? What do you? Like swinging the door, hitting somebody as they're walking by. So seriously.
15 feet in a landscape environment isn't. And, if there is 3 feet of landscape, maybe part of it is the size. It needs to be, the landscape buffer needs to be wider.
It's, give me some numbers, because all we need to do is change some numbers here.
So does the 10 become 15? So you're talking about changing the 10 feet to 15 feet?
The 10,
We have 50.
we have 15 right now. So you're talking about changing the 3-foot minimum tree and landscaping.
I think that buffer is critical
Yeah.
to the safety discussion. Having landscape along there, having tree edge along there.
Right, three seems narrow. to me.
Three's pretty minimal.
Yeah.
I mean, that gives you a tree grade up on the other side of the building, but maybe we want something a little bit wider on those.
So that's, So, right, Low Street's the only place where we can find this. So
So if it was
5, 6,
6 feet,
6 feet, okay,
then 5 feet.
6 and 5 and 15, 26.
These are recommendations, right?
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to push this so far back that they start to have a challenge with laying out the parking garage.
Yeah.
But I do want to have a reasonable dimension on those streets, so we have responded to the safety. So I think with 6 and 5 and 15, I think
So have we just cast your eyes back over this thing? Is there anything that you would like to change aside from that 6, the tree and landscaping buffer changing up 3 to 6 feet? Or is there anything you'd like to add?
no, I think that does.
So in that case, I would accept a motion to adopt this report with the deletion of the question mark in the second paragraph and changing 3 foot to 6 foot on the 3rd page.
I would move that we accept this report with those amendments.
Great. Any further discussion? No? All those in favor? Okay. Done. So now we are on to the last, uh, major item of the evening. Is the housing production plan.
Thank you, planning board members. We carried this a couple of times.
What's one more time? No, kidding.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So I'm gonna be very brief. Sometimes I get requests for more, sometimes I get requests for less, so I'm just gonna be very brief, and then you can tell me if you want me to unpack anything. This is just the table of contents I threw on the screen. This is a plan that we use for long-range planning. For housing issues, it's, you know, kind of like the master plan's housing section, so it's focused specifically on housing. It's a strategy for the next 5 years as to how we can create as much housing opportunities, you know, different variety of housing, particularly affordable housing. And then there's a whole finer grained discussion of what's affordable and what ratio, you know, percentages and all that. But at the end of the day, it's, you know, renewed on at least a 5 year basis. It's subject to certain standards by the state as to what the plan includes and how it's developed and so forth. But in essence, it includes the typical, what you might expect recommendations for things that the city can do to create more housing options, particularly on the affordable end. So it recommends things like, can we use any surplus city property that might be appropriate for housing for that? Can we change the zoning ordinance to facilitate housing? We're obviously discussing some of those things actively right now with district, with the Kmart, and we'll be rolling that to the larger Low Street area. So all those things are really touching on housing in different ways, but zoning is obviously one of the key ways that the city can do it, because we don't necessarily create the vast majority of housing. We, you know, in some cases, we're focused on the regulation of that, as opposed to directly creating it. So we have limited city property that could be used for that anyway. Zoning changes, and there's programs that the city can run and so forth. So the plan recommends things like you might expect, everything in the typical municipal toolbox for those things. And this plan has to be submitted to the state for review and approval as well. It's following certain protocols that they have for how these plans are developed, and we've done this several times before in my time here. And so the city council's already taken a vote on it, but we've not completed the process with the planning board. So the question here is, if you review the plan, if you have any questions or concerns or things you'd like to tweak. And I think Rick, you already provided some comments. Ian Burns, who's our rep at the Merrimack County Planning Commission, has been the point person working on, they have staff there working on a variety of housing plans for the surrounding communities, following a similar template and so forth. And this is pretty routine, so they can help us to tweak a few things. And so we have a couple of, you know, tweaks to make before we send it off to the state, little edits here and there. And so if there's anything you'd like us to take into account, obviously we'd like to do so. But we ultimately want to get this off to the state. Secondary to its purpose for helping us create housing as a strategic plan, more housing options, particularly on the affordable end, and being eligible for state grant programs, is its use for us in having so-called safe harbor status. So one of the ways of getting to safe harbor status is by having a housing production plan that is up to date, that has been submitted to and, you know, approved by the city council, planning board, and by the state, you know, meaning it's consistent with the requirements. And it maps out a plausible path. We're creating as much housing as we can to meet the threshold each year. Roughly, you know, we're talking 42 units a year, is the number we would need to make a year. But we're very close to 10%, which is the threshold under 40B that we've heard before. So one of the ways to get the safe harbor status, which is essentially how we were, you know, a year ago, was having the updated housing production plan. It's up to date with the state, and we've produced housing. We're either at for 10% or we produced the 42 units a year. And at that time, because of the Boston Way permitting, primarily the 40R district permitting, we were in safe harbor status because we had an updated plan and we were making progress each year. Because they're using new census numbers, we've dropped, they finally started using the 2020 numbers, where our ratio dropped a little bit below 10. So obviously our goal there is to create the 42 units a year at least, or get to 10% and higher. But in either case, to create those units, that's not the primary reason for having the plans to create the housing itself, the options, but it's a secondary benefit, as we've talked about a lot this year. It's good for us to be in safe harbor status because we can never control local zoning, you know, everywhere else in the city. And so because that's very important, it also is important that we have this plan updated with the state. So if you have any, you know, further edits, unless you want to, you know, continue to other agenda, which is probably fine. Our plan would be to incorporate, you know, any final edits, get it off to the state, get the state's approval, check that box. And then obviously we're focused on the remaining piece of, you know, verifying to the state we're making progress with our unit count.
So,
fine.
yeah, so a couple questions. Just in background, in order to reflect the increase in the number of affordable units in the SHI, what state do those have to be, and do they have to be planned, permitted, and completed?
Yeah,
Or
sorry, that's a great question. And it's actually, unfortunately, it's a messy one. The real explanation is a little bit messy as to, because the SHI is not quite as, it's a little bit like a moving target because things sometimes need to be added and then they're removed. And the reason that is, to your point, we will essentially get credit when the planning board, we've done this before with the 40R district is the one that we're familiar with recently. As soon as the planning board's approved that project, we're sending it off to the state and we're getting credit for the planning board's approval of that. However, if the developer doesn't actually end up building it, or it takes takes 5 years, 10 years down the road, doesn't end up building for that long, it's gonna come off the listing a year and a half later. Because they don't give you credit for it after that, they say, we're gonna give a little bit of, leeway here for the developer to build the thing, So to your point, it's a little hard to know definitively because we're probably dependent on a few other factors like the developers control when they go for permitting or construction. But in essence, initially, we should be, whenever we're doing these 40R projects or 40B type projects, we should be getting credit for that on the approval of the units. And it has to meet all, and the restrictions and blah, blah, blah. But that's, it's not waiting until they've done the building and they've got the occupancy in hand. In every instance, you can get credit for it from the permitting phase in advance of that.
So I understand, follow up on your question, does that mean the count takes effect with the plan?
So like
So we get to the 10% number.
So like Haley's, we have credit for the Haley's project, not yet built, but because it's been permitted by the planning board, it is approved, and so the count, the 92 units is on our inventory.
Oh.
Yeah. But again, if we go like a year, it's not. So that's why, it makes sense to try to keep things moving.
stuff delayed. So another part which touches on a point that Rick made, I think, the number 42 that we have is continues year after year, but that 42 is based on the 2020 census. And
Yeah,
that's
so
why
it was
stays-
40, now
stays
it's
the same.
42. It's been slightly increased, so 42 units is what we need,
Right. But that's why it stays the same each year, because it's all based on the static 2020
Correct.
census.
And so there's basic language in the statute. A fair amount of this is actually embedded in the regulations that were adopted by the Executive Office of Housing and Local Communities, or used to be DHCD. So a lot of it's in there, and one of those is this 0.5% of your total housing stock, which goes back to our, 42 units a year. If we create 42 units a year, or 0.5% of our entire housing stock each year, we can show we're making demonstrable progress towards the 10%, even if we're not at 10%, and still be in safe harbor status. So you can either be at 10%, or you can demonstrate progress each year with an approved plan. So obviously, we'll take either one from a safe harbor status,
Okay, so in a general question that I have is, as far as us sort of approving the HPP, I mean, there's a lot of like data in here and quotes from different studies that range from 2015 to 2020 and so forth. So there's lots of things that are, the facts and figures are being compared against the other, which represent different dates. So it's like apples and oranges going on. But so we're not, by approving this, we're not saying, yeah, I agree with all this data.
And I would say that what we should focus on. I wrote this memo a month ago to Ian, and it, identified some mistakes and some question marks that I couldn't figure out what he was saying. But I think what we should focus on is the strategies, because that's where the rubber hits the road.
Right.
So if we, we can, the numbers in the beginning can be wrong, but we should be thinking about what is it about the affordable housing development that we want to do. And so focusing on strategies is really, and it's also nice because it's only 2 pages.
Right.
So,
Yeah. So that was the main area. I looked at the executive summary page, which is sort of summarizes what they think they learned from all the data. And then there's the strategies that said, this is what we're attempting to do.
Yeah.
We're encouraging people to do.
I think that's a valid question or concern pretty much with any long range plan or strategic plan, master plan, strategic plan for any subject matter, because there's so much in there, or can be so much in there, that, and this is, I think a reference point that came up with the council as well. I mean, not everybody's gonna agree with every single point in there, or might have a debate about this or that, or its relevance of, being included, blah, blah, blah. Some of the things are required by the state, you have to show certain data, et cetera. But, like Rick said, I think the main things here are for us to agree on the basic strategies that we think make sense, without necessarily worrying about every fine grained detail. For instance, there's a table we have to include that shows how we can actually reach that unit count, each year. But we don't know that the individual decisions about what's zoning and change, what's the zoning change, what's the sale of city property, what's the permit process in order to design it. What's permitted by the private sector, those are all determined later on. This is basically a reasonable strategy demonstrated to the state. We should obviously try to implement as best we can the plan. But all those details still have to be, vetted through the usual procedures and processes. And, that's why you wouldn't necessarily expect everybody to agree with every single point or every single sentence. But if we can agree on the basic substance, then it gives us a basic, guidance.
And so we're one of several stakeholders that are forming this. I mean, is that?
Well, for this plan, so the typical process for this plan is it has to be approved by the city council and by the planning board. That's, various plans have different statutory or regulatory, requirements to meet eligibility under certain programs or are mandated by the state, different ways. Some of them are not mandated at all and they're, done locally anyway. But in this case, there is a specific structure for the plan by the state. They do require those specific, actions to be taken as demonstration that the city has, had a public, process, has taken into account the policy level discussion in some way. They obviously can't guarantee that every community is going to implement everything in these plans, and they recognize that some of those things might, for good reason, change, or modify as implementation goes through. But they are able to see that we're having an active discussion about these things. We're proactively planning for them as best we can. We're doing it in organized fashion and trying to do that,
Sorry, I didn't.
Oh, no, it's okay. I had some other concerns. It's similar to Rick about some of the specific numbers and things in there, but I'm willing not to worry about those. But the things like, the median household income is a different number on page 23 than it is on page 24. Or the calculation of the mortgage and payments and stuff. I tried to recreate their calculation and I couldn't do it. Also, I didn't know what interest rate they were using, and that's been changing so much lately.
Yeah, thank you. If you, what you might do, it's up to you how you want to do it. You could, for instance, you could bullet list, and Rick, you had done this a bit, for Ian, is you could bullet just a couple of things and we could ship those off to Ian, make sure that they're addressed one way or another in the, in edits, tweaks, clarifications in the document. We can also circle back with you, what the clarification was, if there's a question there, in terms of data and, whatever.
Yeah, just thought it would be helpful if they specified the interest rate they were using in the calculation rather than just throwing the numbers out there.
Right, yeah, we can definitely ask them to elaborate on that, clarify, in the plan and circle back to clarify for you. And you could also have that separately, even if you will, from, any substantive things that you're concerned about, so we can make sure that those are both getting to them and in our revised plan.
I think that's a lot of what I was concerned about is just not being able to figure out how they got to a certain point,
Right, it needs a little more explanation.
Yeah, they're missing numbers, yeah.
Right.
Instead of throwing all those things out there.
Yeah, and I think part of that was probably driven a little bit by this happens per act in different ways, but in this case, previously in prior years, there was an instance in which we don't plan ourselves a little more detail locally with a consultant. Then there was a more recent, a couple of rounds of the regional planning agency helping out with some of these plans. So it's really more of a template process. And so using the template, they may not have plugged in yet the explanation, little captions with things, right? So some of that I think is for good reason. Other communities are probably in a similar dialogue about, could you clarify this? Could you add a caption for that? Could you explain where this number coming from? So all good points to ask for them.
The other item I just wondered about, which I didn't really understand, was the housing choice community designation and just what that is or how it is that we maintain that, because one of the strategies is to maintain that, but I wasn't clear about what that is or how we go about maintaining that designation.
The state has programs that they unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately change, from administration to administration or, year to year. In this case, doing certain things, like having a 40-hour district, streamlined permitting for as-of-right housing, those are the things that the state's looking for. So when we're able to say we have an as-of-right permitting process for multifamily, or we've already done a 40-hour district, for instance, state says, oh, great, you check a box, you're able to be eligible for housing choice grants, or you're, so, for instance, you could apply for housing because you're a housing choice community and you only get access to those funds because you're doing these zoning practices or, things like that. So that's in essence what we're talking about there. And you might see other terms like that periodically because it's a similar program that the state's running where if you do this, it's a carrot. If you do this, you'll get access to these grant programs.
Okay, so it does state that we are designated that way now, but it talks about maintaining that. I wasn't sure.
That's
what it takes
because
to maintain it.
Meaning if the program parameters may change. Yeah, so it's important for us to, we have to see if the state changes a program or, if the parameters behind that, they want us to change how they're doing it. There's a resiliency program that the municipal vulnerability preparedness program. They have a 2.0 program, so to be eligible for funding in the second round, program, in the second range of that, you have to bring your local grant stage according to 2.0 standards, not the 1.0 standards that we started with. So it's one of those things where it could be adjusted and we do need to make sure we're up to date. That way we can still be eligible for those state funds.
Yeah, so one of my concerns as I read through the whole thing, a lot of the data they keep talking about is how, the difficulties of people staying in their homes or whatever and not having enough housing so they can downsize appropriately, or not having people selling big houses for cheap so that the small families can afford to get the bigger houses. But to me, there's nothing in the strategies that address what I think is the biggest factor that's driving that is the rising property tax expense. There's nothing that says the city is going to try to minimize increasing property tax and all that, which to me is like one of the biggest factors forcing this whole issue.
So that's a key. So from a substantive nature, that's something you think should be noted in the plan in some way, reference that it's a factor. Yeah.
I mean, there is a point in 4, this is not as broad as you're talking about.
Yeah.
There is a point in 4 about exploring a tax exemption policy, keep seniors in their home as a function of aging in place. You're talking about
Broader one, yeah, I see that's a specific
Yeah.
proposal, but yeah, it as a general issue, that's what's really.
One of the things that I had questioned in my memo was whether there's this thing called the residential exemption, which perhaps 20 communities or maybe 20 or 30 communities in the state have adopted. And it's a way to lower taxes for lower value homes. So if you're below, I can't remember exactly, if you're below the median value, you get a benefit in your taxes.
Are we allowed to add different strategies to this particular plan? So that's a good example where I've witnessed people, growing older in their homes, and they can't keep up with the taxes. And I've seen some towns do tax deferments. So you don't necessarily remove all the taxes from your tax roll, which I think is a concern, at least currently the way things are managed. And so if you do a tax deferment, when they go to sell, whether it be them or their estate, the taxes are then recouped. But it's not a burden for the person that's aging in place, so to speak. Right. So I feel like that's a prudent, practical, potential solution that doesn't necessarily rip away, the taxes that are theoretically justifiable, if you're thinking from fairness, from house to house. But at the same time, being empathetic, maybe there's always a fault in implementing that versus an exemption, which I feel like is, actually, I feel like that's in there.
Yes, wouldn't that then have to include someone else from the city that were learned in those matters? I mean, it would be hard to recommend something with a financial impact if we didn't know what that benefit would be.
Yeah, so I've seen it where the city's assessor has a quick meeting, here's the application, and they fill it out and they sign it. And
it may merit, I don't know, merit, I'm just saying that we're gonna make a recommendation, like if we make something that was legal, we'd ask city council, right? This would be something to be verified, so we're not just making up.
Right.
A typical way to address that would be say, recommend exploring options 4, and then you use more generic language to maybe provide the full range of what you're talking about, but recognizing that, say, the finance director is going to look and say, we have that regulatory stack structure that allows it, right? Because that's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
So ultimately speaking, if there's authorization board already, otherwise we have to get special legislation, to do it. So ideally, to your point, we would verify that, but you could add or you could include something that said, please explore that option or try to do it to the extent it's feasible.
And we already do have a what's it called? Can't remember which chapter it is. We already have the senior tax exemption. So it seems like that bullet, the fifth bullet under strategy 4 is we're already doing it. So the right thing is really looking at more options. It's not looking at that one little
Right.
option, more options.
You said exemption.
So much unpredictability though in that on just annual budgets, because you don't know when these people are gonna sell. So you're,
There are some, unfortunately, there is some of that prediction that has to be done and it's the best of their ability. And even with I can't imagine the finance director, he's got different complications on his than like our land use stuff, but they do have to kind of, guess what's going to happen because the next legislature might have a different program that's been established and then a new, set of people who are participating in it. So they have to make the best they can. And that does impact it. And there are some unknowns to your point that those have to adapt to and apply because there's a new program.
honestly, yeah, like what is an allocation of, okay, we anticipate in 10 years and all of a sudden the 10-year, 11, 12, waiting for these people to sell.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, that's a tricky one.
It is one of the things that makes me, I'm a big fan of simplicity in part because the complexities you add become harder to deal with other permutations of and know and deal with this, complexities over time. And that's an example maybe.
Well, that's the reason I mentioned is because if they're gonna do exemption for that, they're just gonna take the tax away.
Right.
What's it, maybe a hybrid.
You're right. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying it's.
Just, it would be written in such a way as to identify, financial incentives to preserve people stay in their homes.
Yeah.
Just open-ended like that, rather than being very specific.
Generic, yeah.
about it.
One other concern I had looking at this was under the action plan matrix. I think the phraseology in there is pretty nebulous. I'm not sure what value it has, but it just says, allow for housing types that accommodate the needs of residents. And that's all it says. And what do we base that on? Well, it says that I was looking specifically at the one where the planning board's involved in this, or where it says encourage development and preservation of both renter and owner occupied housing that is affordable to low and moderate income, specifically the 30-80%. Okay, so as the planning board, we would be, it's a little nebulous. I can say, okay, yeah, this is a nice project, and they're proposing that it's, has this
Yeah.
ADU. Okay, so maybe that lends itself to that, or
And does the planning board have any role with the Affordable Housing Trust?
But yeah, there are some areas you don't touch, but the housing trust will be touching, right? Or the city council will be touching because it's.
So that's a correction to change planning board to, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that tangentially, you can make the argument, right, that the planning board is involved potentially in terms of permitting process or, incentivizing zoning and a permit.
that's what I'm guessing, but it
Deep
seems.
reportability, but there's a fair amount of that that's others have roles, and I think I attribute more of it to other roles that I would, that the 60%, for instance, it's not driven as much by the zoning end of it.
I think that particular item in the action plan matrix is really the CPA semicolon Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Doesn't say what we're gonna do with it, just says CPA Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So maybe have some wording in there to say what that means.
Yeah.
Sure. So, I guess my focus was on strategy 2, which is all about zoning, which it seems to me that's the one that we're mostly involved in. And I actually had 4 recommendations. The first one, which says explore possible zoning parameters for allow. And I just thought, change that to allow. So allow 2-family structures by right in R2 and R3 zoning. That's something that we could do. As a city.
Yeah, it's a more specific action.
Rather than explore possible zoning parameters. And then the second one, I wasn't really clear how incorporating design guidelines would help with facilitating housing.
I don't disagree. I forget exactly where along the line in the discussion with the draft of the plan this came up, or it was, the suggestion was made to start there. I don't myself see a strong relationship there. It's tangential to me, or it's a factor, but it's not necessarily.
Yeah, so that's when I would.
Meaning take it up because
Take it out,
it's confusing to have. Yeah.
And then on the fifth and eighth bullet, the fifth bullet, I think we should take out this MCMOD because we're gonna be adopted by the end of December, so.
Oh.
So we don't, it has to be, have to be part of our plan.
Yeah,
And then
Yeah.
take out the reference to it in the next to last bullet. The MCMOD, because that's our MBTA zone.
Yeah.
It just, if you're gonna do that, then you need to find, have we done it? We would have done it before we don't.
yeah, I mean, this is part of the problem that I lament about with the long range planning process. I mean, it takes 6 months to a year to do one of these plans. We're expected to update it every 5 years, right? And so, and some of this is done through a period of meetings, right? So weeks between meetings, some of different bodies, various different people involved in the draft. To your point exactly, this was the draft page we got from the planning agency, and this was June, and now we're in November, so. Agreed. We would tweak, things like that to make sure it wasn't outdated.
So how do you want us to proceed? Do you want us to endorse the plans subject to some list of changes or?
I defer to you entirely, but I think I would recommend, based on what I've heard, Dave, to your point, I would say, if you could recommend approval and adoption of the plan, with recommendation for the incorporation of, and then we would list off, I think, in whether or not you and I were together, we just communicate to Ian, and the copy of what the House Trust members know, because they've been involved in this, just let them know what's being recommended here, and then presumably that would be addressed in, tweaks or revisions to that language.
A lot of the stuff that Mother and I brought up, it's not policy. It's just making sense of numbers.
Right, and that's why it's important to distinguish, because you don't need to cover all that detail in your planning board recommendation, but it definitely is worthwhile for us to address.
Yeah, we should
So
send it to him.
we would pull those, let's take care of all those too, but those are more like housekeeping things, whereas this is the substance. Yeah.
Right.
Anybody else have anything else that they would like to suggest or in any part of this?
Suggest there's a subcommittee between you guys. Jamie?
Do you want an action tonight or do you want to?
That's up to you. I don't have a strong preference. I obviously want to do things like this as soon as possible. I don't think waiting another meeting will make a difference here. If you want to wait till next meeting to,
So we could do the same type of thing we did with the.
look at all those things. Yeah.
this time.
I think that would work. In the meantime, we can make sure everything's kind of, we can work the get our layouts ready to go, and we're just waiting for that. And
Okay. Well, set, good, so we'll continue this and we'll wrap it up next week.
next meeting, okay, thank you.
And the only things we have on the next meeting, like put only in quotation marks, is ADUs, right?
Yes.
And Story Avenue, Chocolate Street.
Is that the joint meeting?
No, it is, ADU is joint meeting.
ADU is joint, yes. Yeah, I suspect we'll probably have an updated version at that point. I don't know, when, if you will, but there'll probably be an updated version. Although we talked about some edits the last time, I think there'll be probably a subsequently edited version. And so obviously we'll get that to you as soon as we're able to. Anything else that might go with that. But I think coming in that discussion, I think our hope is to see if the tweaks that the sponsors have made are addressing sufficiently the concerns from the planning board, council members, and something that can be brought to the board for vote, or if there's still anything to be made at that point. So where we left off.
Is the next meeting after the 20th? December 4th.
December 4th, yes,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
but there's not much yet.
For that agenda.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think we'll be hopefully digging into Story Avenue.
Yeah, I think that'll be.
Time to get going.
Good.
So, okay, anything else that you have for us?
Definitely, like Chris, I mean, picking up more discussion this year. And all your thoughts about sorry, street, bring them to the discussion. Because that question is, what do we want to rewrite in the zone? Recognize that we may have, as a separate distinct footprint, this Kmart area in some way, one way or another, however that's permitted or done, but we should, just like you've all been making, look at a larger area, just like recognizing that even if there's an anomaly of height or scale or something like that, we're establishing in a village or a neighborhood or district, there. So what do we want that to be? And that way we can draft something that's consistent with all the dialogue we're having. So bring all your thoughts.
And you have somewhere a page, I think, with a presentation from the Harvard students.
Yes, although because it's been a while since I've said, I have to see where it is exactly.
Okay,
Maybe it would make sense to me, because actually, I think one of the councilors asked for this as well. Maybe I should just make a point of sending out the planning board city council again, just hear the report.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard things with the website, the way it works, sometimes you get hard to find. So, yeah, I'll push that. Because that had a range of different thoughts too, and it was kind of a broad brush, approach.
and it had like some views with different, you apply this strategy here, this is what buildings would look like.
Right, and like 3 level tiers of like density or height, right? It covered some of the urban design considerations, covered some of the tax, revenue versus, costs impact type, thoughts that we would normally have. They tried to look at that, so the report kind of covers the landscape.
Just, go ahead, Jamie.
To the extent that and like 40 wide, some of the things that were strategies, not to go back to the production plan necessarily, but to the extent some of those things are in the production plan, does that give you the ability to go to get resources and funding for studies and consultants? Does that make it easier for you?
Yeah, they definitely, when we go for grants, they definitely look for us to show them, or point to the excerpts in our plans and say, it says right here, we strategize this, and this is already in there. They definitely want to see those things. That comes up routinely. They want us to show that it's in there somewhere. So we always try to make sure that we've covered that. Or it's, it's a tie back to our comprehensive plan or strategic plan. Yeah.
Because ultimately this is so big, we'll need a consultant involved.
Oh, we're gonna have consultants. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it'll be partly for visualization, and then will be partly the work, the drafting of it. But I think first off, we need to talk about, the visualization part. What do we want to have there and what scale, in nature, do we want that to be? I tend to be of the mind that it should be a little bit more like a village center, something a little bit more akin to the downtown Victoria district in some way. A little bit more walkable with the commercial first floor, like you're talking about, trying to keep that sort of a mix, walkable. But we have to decide what we want there, rezone it accordingly.
Just
What's
on
the
that,
deadline for that?
We have to use the grant funds by June 30th of 25, so we have until the summer of 25.
But and in terms of using the grant funds, was there was a providing the product, wasn't there?
To the state?
To the state.
Yeah, the state wants to see the deliverables, so they're obviously, we're gonna give whatever visualizations we might have put together for the process, but they're obviously gonna want to see the final, zoning. It doesn't mean the city council has to adopt that, that's still up to the city council.
has to be a
We have to
draft.
demonstrate to the state, here's the draft zoning we've put together as a recommendation, for consideration by the city council. And it would have, a zoning map of some type, presumably, changing what that would happen in that area. Overlay or underlay district, all those, and then would have the text, right? So we'd say, here's our text, and there might still be further discussion on the city side after that, at that point, when we're in city council or proceedings, whatever. But there would definitely be a deliverable there that the state would be able to, look at as well and say, they're always looking for examples, implementation, of course, but examples of, smart growth districts or, transit development and multifamily housing. So I mean, they want to see those things happen. So that's the deliverable they're looking for, is the zoning, and ideally they'd like us to report back that it got adopted. But they know that we can't guarantee that here. So
When are we getting started? The deadline is June.
Yeah.
November.
Next meeting.
that's it.
Yeah, we start next meeting.
That's what we have. Agenda for at least the next 2 weeks.
so real quick, just for visualization purposes, how tall is One Boston Way again, approximately?
60, it's something about 60.
And how many stories?
4.
One Boston Way is 4.
It was gonna be fun.
It was gonna be 5. And then 3 Boston.
It's 5, okay. How many units approximately per?
So it's 76 in 1, 84 in 2, and 92 in 166 in 1, which is a billion. So,
Okay. All right. So let's think about it.
Yeah, so this Kmart is essentially 2 of those.
2, right.
2.5.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, good. Nothing else?
yeah.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn?
All in favor? Good. Thanks.
Right, that one is the quickest one. That was kind of an initial response.
Thank you.
I would say that. Yeah, I would say send it.
Do you like these up?
Send it all
We
the
need a piece of paper and you just.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, very good. Right, before, or just.
See you.
Sorry.
About the, questions about the details of the housing production.
Oh, yeah, anything like that, you just both.
I was kind of curious if. When they said, you get 80% of our water from the reservoir, but if you had a dam overflow, it only impacts 75% of the city water supply. So that implies to me that you're getting 5% of your water from the reservoir when there's an overflow. You could still get 5% of your.
Yeah,
There's a bunch of numbers in there. I just said, is that true or is that?
Yeah, you know what, and frankly, and this is probably due to time, Rick and I feel like I'm always talking about this, Rick, like, this is one of those time consuming things, like, there are certain places where I've decided I'm not going to spend my time nitpicking over not, no, because you're 100% right. But I have found so many of those things in my work in general that I have to parse off and just focus on the things that I feel like are
You're crazy.
Yeah, because so, because I can't possibly chase after all these things that make any sense, or, just explain, or.
So I just wonder how many of those things I'll throw in the list.
Well, and, in fairness to your point too, I mean, like, and if, even though we're trying to work with creative planning, I mean, they're also back to rush to, they're trying to push this stuff out the door.
Yeah.
So they were giving us something that they admittedly probably were still doing work with thing on, and that's not necessarily a big deal, but it can create confusion and issues because someone looks at it and they say, well, what about this sentence? Why does it say that? And we're like, well, that was being corrected, but that's corrected.
Well, yeah, I guess one of the things is probably, they're working on 14 different communities at the same time.
Right.
And so there's a certain amount, if they've got a template, they're sort of doing it and adjusting it for community, but for example.
They may carry over something.
Like that thing about the MC, whatever the.
Yeah, there was one, like, line that was like completely copied, like, kept from another one that, like, has to be completed, Yeah, and then at the same time, we're being pressed with, like, it's been, a month and a half since we last met, and we're waiting for the plan, the draft plan with revisions from the housing trust to come back, so we can then ship it off to the planning board and city council. So it was like, how do we have to judge at that point, like, do we want to wait another month to try to get it, or are we trying to get it, like, knowing that there's gonna be one or two things that unfortunately, it's imperfect, I'm never keen on this kind of stuff, but
So they also lost a key staff person during the process.
They did, yes,
Which is sudden.
yeah.
From the Merrimack Valley.
Yeah. Lauren was one of the people working on it.
Yeah.
Gone.
So I see they're working on 3 Hancock Street, again, finally, after the month and a half delay. I guess they got their stop work order.
Yeah.
Is this the one on the corner? No.
It's one building in from Bromley on Hancock.
It's close, it's a small one close to the corner.
It's a small house that's just jammed in between 2 others there.
Well, it's the decon ordinance, and so because when you get down to the sheathing, the ordinance is actually protecting the sheathing, is what happened was the ordinance is protecting the wood, the wood frame itself.
Yeah.
Right? But it's protecting the sheathing. So when he went in there, he removed too much of the sheathing. It didn't match the percentage he had presented to ZBA initially. So what he had to do effectively was go back to the ZBA and say, I need to remove more. And so that's what he had to delay, to go back to the board. He came up previously with another one, it was like 6 month to a year delay. Because it was basically in order to punish them. Yeah, it was a 12 to 14 hearing.
Fined him like $60,000.
Yeah.
And said he can't work on it for 6 months.
Right, and that caused, like, there's 2 different tensions. The abutters were showing on this one, they're like, please don't
let it sit there empty.
Because not everybody's completely happy with that scenario where it just sitting there for.
And they're not happy with the dumpster sitting there taking up 2 parking spaces.
Right.
Right. And it doesn't do anybody.
Exactly.
If the end result's gonna be the same.
Right, yeah, like you said before, you're not gonna see it, that's all covered up.
That's just theory, and I don't have a horse race directly myself, but it's very odd to have a zoning provision that basically protects not only a structural, element sometimes, not necessarily, but it's not protecting the thing you see on the outside, because you can change the siding all you want.
Right.
So it's not protecting anything the public sees.
Yeah.
And I guess
Protecting the integrity. of-
it's understandable, as a historical, thing, but I haven't seen anywhere else in Massachusetts, a zoning provision that's saying you have to protect that site.
Like that strict.
And distinguishes it to the point where someone gets a cease and desist, because effectively they want to replace old rotted sheeting with new plywood that's gonna, I'm not hung up on it myself over that to fight over the sheeting. I could definitely see with the wood framing, maybe, I see the argument there, but when you go to the sheeting, I start to wonder,
Yeah.
like, how much is it really worth arguing over something no one's gonna see ever?
Right.
It's not the structural elements either, and a lot of them end up being rotted out.
Right.
So it's not that I'm opposed to it. I just don't know that that's the fight we need to pick.
Right.
A lot of older structures where people have to renovate.
Yeah.
Do we really have to force all of them to have like a jigsaw puzzle of new plywood?
Holes in the old wood.
Especially if you're not needing the exterior.
But the exterior, like if we had something like, I would be much more in favor of something that you gotta preserve the exterior.
Right. Exactly.
Because that's the thing the public benefits.
Window detail or door treatment or.
Yeah, all right, if you got that, you gotta preserve it, you gotta, make that a code.
Right,
But
right.
then I fight over the sheething, because you can't even, the public's not even see it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the other interesting one is the, 23 Lincoln Street, the one by across from Perkins, where they're putting the big addition,
Oh, the big structure.
the big structure, making
Yeah.
it this nice
That was
little,
one that Judy talked about in her letter to the editor.
maybe,
She
yeah.
said, how come that can go through without any?
That's because it meets the zoning, because it's a big lot.
Yeah.
And all, but they,
Well, I mean,
the
again,
old house is about 1,600 square feet, the new one is 4,400. And,
and that's a question about, one question is, do we change the zoning? Do we say, are we going to change the zoning to say, your setbacks have to be this, your size of your buildings effectively have to be small?
Right.
They don't say that right now.
Right,
So someone's gonna maximize what they can do.
Right, exactly. So I was talking to the realtor, they have an offer for it already, 4 million.
Yeah.
That's why I can't find a house to.
To downsize into, no.
But like the tile work, the permit listed as like $75,000 just for the tile work in the back.
I was fascinated, the 20, 21, 22, 25 Hancock Street, the four.
Yeah.
Two family ones there and all this. So the one is for sale already.